Hello there, today I am here to give you my entire April wrap up. It's been a long time since I've wrapped up a whole month in one video, and the reason that I've done that is because at the start of the month I had only read 1.5 books and I really didn't feel like it was worth doing a part 1 for those. However, I have read quite a lot towards the end of the month, which means that I now have a lot to speak to you about. I'm going to try and do it fast, but I also want to give each book their due credit, so it might be a long video. Let's get into it. First, I read Olivia Creation by Ruth Ozeki. This is the author of A Tale for the Time Being, which is a book that I read a few years ago, and it's a book that was quite big news on BookTube. And it was something that I enjoyed, but the ending really let it down for me, to the point where it's not really a book that I have fond memories of, because I felt like the entire book was leading up to something and then the end was just kind of a splurge that went in an entirely just random direction, as though the author had kind of written herself into a hole and didn't know how to get out of it. But this is a book that I saw in a charity shop, and I thought I would try her out because I have heard generally good things about Ruth Ozeki, and her writing was good enough to make me want to revisit her. I really enjoyed this. I actually think this was a better written book than A Tale for the Time Being, actually. This was very poetic, very beautiful language. And it's a book that looks at quite a lot of different issues, but predominantly it looks at the food industry, and we basically follow a potato farm and the potato industry and these sort of additives that are put into potatoes and the kind of chemicals that are used on them in America. Follow a family who run a potato farm, we follow their neighbours who also help on the potato farm, and we also follow a group of activists who are fighting against these potatoes. And predominantly we follow the daughter of the family who own the potato farm. She's estranged, but her father is in ill health, so she kind of ends up being contacted and told to come home, and she develops a sort of relationship with the activists, and we go from there. It's a really interesting book. As I say, it looks at a lot of different themes. Again, I feel like the ending kind of I don't know, I think it wrote itself into a bit of a corner again. That seems to be something that Ruth Ozeki is quite good at. She writes these sprawling, beautiful books, but she seems to have some difficulty wrapping things up. So again, the ending of this felt rushed and it was a little bit unsatisfactory. However, I thoroughly enjoyed the reading process of this. The writing in it was absolutely beautiful, and it was one of those books that I took quite a while on, even though it's not the thickest, but it was quite nice to take quite a while on it because it was such a gentle, beautiful book, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I'm surprised that A Tale for the Time Being gets the recognition that it does when I haven't really heard anything about Olivia Creation. I didn't overly think that the subject matter would interest me, not that I'm not interested in what goes into our food, but potato farming and things like that I wouldn't have necessarily picked up if it weren't Ruth Ozeki, but I would highly recommend this if it sounds at all interesting, or if you've enjoyed anything of hers before. Then I read my non-BookTube book this month, which was Alpine Ballad by Facile Boykow. I have done a separate review of this, so to keep this video shorter, I'm not going to talk about it much here. This is a translated fiction, translated by Mikolai Kylo, I think that's how you say that name. And it was sent to me kindly by Glagoslav Press, which are a publication that I really enjoy reading from. This basically looks at 2 prisoners of war who have escaped during World War II. One is from Russia and one is from Italy, and it looks at the way that they try and overcome their language barriers to sort of come together in their shared situation. It looks at what war does to people, and it ultimately is a bit of a love story. It was fun, it was nice, it's really short, so it's easy to read. I would recommend. Then I wanted some escapism, and I've had this book on my shelf for so long, and that is Robin Hobb's The Ship of Magic, which is book 1 of the Live Ship Traders. I have had it on my shelf for a long time because I've heard nothing but good things about Robin Hobb. However, fantasy is not generally something that I would lean towards or enjoy. Also, it's very thick and there are 3 of them, so I've kind of been putting it off, and I think this month was the ideal time to read it because I just adored this. It genuinely got me through quite a dark time. This is effectively a book, as it sounds, about magical ships. They are made from this magical type of wood, which allows them to become effectively not alive, but they can speak and they can feel the feelings of the people on their ship, and they have to be connected to somebody in their family so that they can keep sane, basically. And we look at predominantly one ship called the Vivacia. yes, the Vivacia, I did get that right. And she has just come alive because basically 3 people have to die on the deck of these ships to make them have these abilities. And she is just quickened, as they say, or come alive, and basically everything on her ship is a bit of a mess. Her owner obviously has died, his daughter has gone off, and we follow all these different characters. We follow the daughter and look at what she's doing. We follow what's happening on the Vivacia and how the ship is being affected by what's taking place on her decks. We follow other ships, there are characters that are ships. It's fantastic, and there is also a pirate in here who I absolutely adored. I have to say, I wanted more of the pirate stuff. Basically he goes around and he steals ships, and he has it in his head that he wants to steal one of these live ships, and he's on his mission to do that. And I thought we could have done with more of him. I definitely think that there wasn't much of his story in here compared to what we got of the others, but obviously this is the first in 3, so it was kind of setting the scene and letting us get to know the ship and the family around her, and then I presume that we're going to see more of the pirate from now on, especially considering what happened at the end of this book. I really can't wait to get to the next ones. I have to say, usually when I pick up a fantasy series, the problem for me is that they're so long and they take so long to get through that I generally will wait a year or more before I get to the next one, so obviously my enjoyment of them is hindered by that. However, after reading this for the first time in I can't remember how long, I really want to get the next one already and start reading it, so I would thoroughly recommend. Really enjoyed, even if you don't like fantasy. It's not really in-depth fantasy other than the ship stuff. Then I read The Importance of Music to Girls by Lavinia Greenlaw. Now I can't remember where I heard of this book, but it must have been from BookTube somewhere because it was on my wish list and I bought it as a present, and I've kind of been putting it off because I don't know, I'm not really a music person, and it's all about Lavinia Greenlaw's experiences with music. However, this is a memoir and I picked it up skeptically, but my goodness, was this beautiful. So yes, this is centered around Lavinia Greenlaw's experiences with music throughout her teenage life and her coming of age story. However, the music is not all there is. I think if you're a music lover and you were born in the 70s, I think you would really enjoy this because there are a lot of cultural references. But mixed in with those is the most beautiful and poignant statements about life and about growing up, and I think me and Lavinia Greenlaw are quite similar in a lot of ways from the sounds of things. So I've highlighted some bits that I wanted to read out to you because the writing in this I think is what really makes it. Perhaps I wanted to be a shadow. Certainly I did not want to be known, but then I barely knew myself. I was still a child in that I operated instinctively, and while I could be horribly talkative on certain matters, I was mute. I was discovering the pleasure of belonging to a different kind of gang in which names, appearance, sexuality and personality were so confusingly and overtly constructed that we were all strangers. Identity was worn rather than embodied. We were keeping ourselves apart, and it was a respite from becoming and having to be clear. And then there's another bit that I really enjoyed that I have highlighted here. My family held me. It was complicated but strong, a machine which made life happen so that I didn't have to. It protected me too. Until I was 11 or so, I was not made to take on substance. Like, oh, she's just beautiful. I have to say I was surprised to see that this had really bad reviews on Goodreads actually. Not terrible, but people generally weren't that taken away from it. I just thought, it blew me away. I think the coming of age stuff in here is so just relatable, it's ridiculous. This was my first 5-star of the year. I don't know how much it's going to stick with me, but I definitely think it deserves its 5-star rating just for how gorgeous it was all in. Then I read the most disappointing book of this month actually, and that was A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway. This is my first full-length Hemingway. I've read a few of his short stories. I have read A Movable Feast, but obviously that's very short. So I kind of went into this thinking that I was gonna, I don't know, because he's an author that I've always thought that I might not enjoy. However, I know that I enjoy his writing, and I've become sort of very interested in his life story of late. I really didn't like this, and it's awkward because obviously the man can write. Like, he's not one of the literary greats for no reason. He has an amazing ability with language, and normally beautiful writing is what I will look for in a book, so it confused me that I really didn't enjoy this. However, I think the best way I can describe it is that this is a book written by somebody who is used to writing short stories and are trying to use those same techniques in a longer work, and it just doesn't work. So this is predominantly about World War One, I think, and it follows a man who is operating in the Italian ambulance service. However, he is American. I believe that this is something that happened to Hemingway, I don't know. And he ends up falling in love with one of the nurses, and they kind of, yeah, it kind of follows their journey, I suppose. But what's really strange about this is that the characters are so 2D. Like, I've never read such 2D characters. And they kind of have these weird conversations. Most of this book is actually conversation, and don't get me wrong, the conversations are written really well. But they're also things that people just wouldn't say. Like, they're really like poignant statements, which, as I say, would work in a short story where you have a brief amount of time to get these feelings across. But in this, it just kind of feels like they're spouting cliches a bit and kind of making these sweeping statements to each other that don't really have any context. The characterization isn't really built upon. The story is kind of like more a case of snippets rather than an ongoing story. And the ending, though bleak, which is what I usually look for, just because kind of like... maybe there is some really clever message. Probably there is some really clever message in this book which I have completely missed. But as a general reading experience, I think it was underdeveloped. I think the characters were overwritten / not written well enough. And yeah, Hemingway's got good language, but that's about all I can really say for this book, sadly. Then I finally read my Shakespeare of the month, which was Antony and Cleopatra. I enjoyed this more than I enjoyed The Winter's Tale last month. I'm still kind of on the verge of giving this up, this challenge, because I am finding that reading one Shakespeare after the other each month, it's kind of, obviously it's not the way that they're intended to be experienced. For one, I'm reading them, and for another, I'm experiencing them all in a very short space of time. And Shakespeare definitely has his go-to themes that he uses. And I'm also finding that it's really difficult to rate Shakespeare's without taking into the fact that, you know, most of our language and our ability to storytell and, you know, so many techniques that we use still today come from Shakespeare, and so many sayings and just language, basically a lot of it came from Shakespeare's works. And I think it's really difficult to separate yourself from that, because in terms of the stories that I'm reading, other than Hamlet, which I really enjoyed, all of the others have kind of been 3 stars for me, honestly, if I were basing them, if they were just plays that I was reading. But then you have to think, well, they are Shakespeare's, and, you know, a lot of this was groundbreaking stuff. So I don't know, it's difficult. I am on the verge of giving up my Shakespeare challenge this year, because I'm kind of finding that the plays that I'm reading are last minute things. But anyway, Antony and Cleopatra is the first historical option that I have read on the recommendation of my boyfriend, and I did enjoy it. It was fine. I think I asked him a little bit about the history, because what I was worried about going into the histories was that I needed to have some context. But actually, I think the context kind of sets it up for itself. So Antony and Cleopatra are, I think she's the queen of Egypt and he's the head of the Roman army. I might be wrong. Tell me if I'm wrong. And they're having an affair, and it kind of looks at what happens there and what happens to them in the end. It was bleak, it was tragic, it was Shakespeare, it was fine. I don't know, as I say, I find it really difficult to rate them, which is why I don't go into them much in my reviews. And also, obviously, they're not meant to be read, they're meant to be watched, so it's also hard to judge them in that sense. But anyway, it was fine. I enjoyed it more than I did last month. And that is everything I read this month. Please let me know what you've been reading and if you've read any of these books, and I will see you next time. Bye!